back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, Episode 11. Starting out at number 1, Sigil of Sleep. 1 mana, blue enchantment. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage to a player, return target creature that player controls to owner's hand. I really like this card. This is a card I've used in a few different decks, okay? The important wording here is when an enchanted creature deals damage to a player. This is not when combat damage is dealt. This is when any damage is dealt, right? Which, of course, is very important. People know this from playing cards like Curiosity, which is the same, right? That's not combat damage, it's any damage, right? So I put this card in my Lizard Pirate deck, right? My Malcolm and Kedis deck, because I put it on my Malcolm, and when Malcolm connects, okay, if I have Malcolm and Kedis both out, the damage that's dealt with the Kedis ability is not combat damage, okay? He'll hit the one player for combat damage, but then he'll hit the other 2 opponents for non-combat damage, just regular damage. And because Sigil of Sleep doesn't care about combat damage, now I'm bouncing a creature for all 3 of my opponents, right? Also have this in my Agar deck, right? I have it in my Agar deck because I have a whole bunch of pingers in that deck, right? And you can put this on a pinger, ping your opponent, and now you've dealt damage to a player, and you can return target creature, right? You get to pick the creature to bounce to that opponent's hand. Works really good in a Vial Smasher deck too. If you have a Vial Smasher deck with blue, and that's what a lot of people will do is put it like a Curiosity on their Vial Smasher if they're playing blue with their Vial Smasher. You can do the same with Sigil of Sleep, right? Where you put Sigil of Sleep on your Vial Smasher, and whoever it happens to smack, you get to bounce a creature. Next up, Skyshard Warbeast. Another great one. Another old card that I cracked open in a pack. You know, Exodus, for me, has a special place in my heart because this was, for those who don't know, this was the first set that had the colored rarity symbols, right? Before that, you didn't know. And I started playing in Tempest Block, and the first like 50 packs of cards or whatever that I opened, there was no rarity symbol. So I had no idea. In fact, I didn't even know there was such a thing. I didn't know there was rares and uncommons and commons. Didn't know that was a thing because the guy who taught me Magic never told me that. So I was cracking open packs, Tempest, Ice Age, and Mirage, and had no idea there was rares and whatnot. So the very next set, you know, I basically started playing Magic when Stronghold came out. The very next set was Exodus, and I saw these symbols and I was like, oh man, wow. And so that's sort of, it was a big deal for me anyway at the time. Sort of big deal for everyone, I guess. Anyway, this is another card that is taking advantage, again, of all those decks that want to play 4 and 5 colors, right? As Skyshard Warbeast enters the battlefield, choose an opponent, right? So you're going to choose one. Skyshard Warbeast's power and toughness are each equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls, okay? And it has trample, okay? This is only 2 mana. So this guy's going to come down. Again, you think about the Golos player who's going to have probably, likely only non-basic lands. Most popular commander in the format. I've said it like 30 times on this channel. He's going to have like 6 or 7 non-basic lands, right? So this comes down, you pick him, right? You pick one opponent. So you get to pick the opponent that has the most non-basic lands. Again, this can be a card that is fantastic in certain play groups. In some play groups, maybe not. It is conditional, but you're always going to have a player with at least a few, right? If this comes down and your opponent has 7 non-basic lands, this is a 7/7 trample creature for 2 mana. That's pretty good. Coming in at number 3, Slaughter. And this actually is completely a coincidence. I didn't plan this at all. Also from Exodus. This one, you know, I look at this and I'm just thinking, okay, 4 mana instant, destroy target non-black creature, can't be regenerated. So the non-black thing can be tricky. You know, they really got rid of that. That used to be, you know, black only killed non-black creatures. I don't even know when the first time they printed a card that was black that killed black. Maybe it was Ravenous Chupacabra. Like, it was recent. It was always the case that a black creature removal spell killed non-black creatures only. Sometimes also non-artifact. I think the idea was that you were scaring them to death. So artifacts can't be scared and black creatures can't be scared. I don't know. Anyway, buyback, pay for life, right? Buyback is really, really strong. It's a super strong ability, especially in Commander. And this is basically free, right? I mean, you're not paying any mana. So this is, you're paying for life, which in some decks you actually want to do. First of all, in a life gain deck, you're going to have a ton of life that you can be paying, right? This is just, the buyback is essentially free because you're going to have the requisite life anyway. Even in a mono black deck, if you're not gaining life, this can be good because you got 40 life. I mean, as we all know, life is really a resource in Commander where you can sort of fiddle around and use it to benefit yourself. I don't know. I'm sort of on the fence about this. I'm throwing it out there because it is very unique. Buyback, destroy a creature. Is it worth it? Basically having that buyback that you don't have to pay for. Coming in at number 4, Smoke. This is one that I've seen a few times in a Commander game. Again, it's a very unique ability, right? In red especially, right? 2-mana enchantment. Players can't untap more than one creature during their untap steps. So, it's a very old card. I'm mentioning it because a lot of people might not know it exists, and it does have a very unique ability. There's a lot of ways to use this, obviously. You can use it in more of a Staxy sort of deck, which usually you don't see in red. I see this a lot, in a Voltron deck. This is great because you can untap your one creature. Everyone else usually wants to untap more than one. You only care about one. I've seen this in a Zedru deck where you play it because with Zedru decks, you don't want a lot of attacking going on. So you play it in your Zedru deck and then you can donate it, right? Because it is a universal effect that affects everybody. So if you give it to your opponent, it's still going to work. It's still going to do its job. There's just a lot of ways you can do it. Again, it's just like with Mudslide. You don't see these effects in red a lot. So I like to mention them in case you happen to be in those colors and you're doing something like this where you just want to sort of slow everyone down and stop attacking from happening. Next up, Snake Pit. Another one that maybe could have got a mention in my color-specific cards. So 4-mana enchantment, whenever an opponent casts a blue or black spell, you may create a 1/1 green snake creature token. So again, you think about the amount of people in a game. This is any opponent casting any blue or black spell. So it just sits there. And again, I've always talked about how I love enchantments that just sit there and give you value and you have to do nothing. They just sit there, they give you stuff. You put no effort into it. 3 opponents, chances are all of them are going to be playing blue or black. I mean, it's definitely a possibility. I really doubt you ever are going to play a game where there are no players playing blue or black. Man, that's got to happen like almost never. So you're always going to be getting something out of this, right? So this can just sit there and just crank out tokens for you sometimes. So if you're playing any deck, like I used to have this in my Pharika deck because I wanted lots of tokens that I could sacrifice and do stuff with. I ended up taking it out for something else. But it can be good in a deck like that where you want to be making lots of tokens. I also had it in my Shanna deck where I wanted, again, to have lots of token creatures. Again, I took it out for something else. I don't know. I might put it back in, though, because, again, there's more and more players playing more colors. And so that increases the chances that you're going to hit this trigger. Also in a snake deck, right? In a Cassetto deck, a Xyrus deck, same thing, right? If you're playing more of a snake theme with that, this could be a great fit. Up next, Snowfall, and this is a crazy one. So 3 mana, enchantment, has cumulative upkeep, 1 blue mana. And I was reading this card and it was just blowing me away as I was reading it. Whenever an island is tapped for mana, its controller may add an additional blue. Wow. If that island is snow, and I was thinking, oh man, all these snow things just came out, right? Its controller may add an additional 2 blue instead. So if you tap a snow land, it adds 2 extra blue. Spend this mana only to pay cumulative upkeep costs. And obviously I'm not serious about this. I just threw this in there because I literally, like a lot of people probably watching this video, I'm reading this card and I'm going, oh man, this is insane. It's so good. And then I got to that last line of text, spend this mana only to pay cumulative upkeep costs. Like obviously this goes from being a phenomenal card to one of the worst cards ever printed. I mean, it has cumulative upkeep itself and you have to use it to pay cumulative upkeep. I just thought it was funny. So I just threw that in there as a joke. The actual number 6 on this list is Soldevi Adnate. By the way, if you want to use Snowfall, feel free to take that suggestion if you really, really need to pay those cumulative upkeeps. So Soldevi Adnate is a human cleric. This is another card that I've used personally in a couple of decks. In particular, I think I did an Aura deck tech where I thought this was a great fit because it is a cleric. So tap, sacrifice a black or artifact creature. Add an amount of black equal to the sacrificed creature's converted mana cost. So again, in any sort of an aristocrats deck, I mean, this is not going to work with tokens, right? You can't sacrifice a token, you'll get 0 mana because it's equal to its converted mana cost. By the way, I wonder when they're going to change that to mana value. I guess they're probably going to eventually errata all these. Anyways, sacrifice a black. So it has to be a black or artifact creature. I don't know if there's a lot of decks out there that are playing artifact creatures in Commander, especially in black. Maybe there is, I don't know. Here's an idea for you if you have one. I just like the black part, right? The black, sacrificing black creatures, and then you get a ritual effect on top of it. I could put this in my Nadir and Miara deck because I can sacrifice my Nadir because, again, I sort of want him to die sometimes. I get a bunch of tokens. I get 6 black mana, right? Because he costs 6, so can be great in that deck. Coming in at number 7, Solitary Visionary. And I have this card on the list. This card is sort of representing all shadow creatures. Again, it's from Exodus. Sort of a coincidence. I mean, obviously shadow creatures are something that I am very familiar with. For that reason, when I first started playing Magic, they were everywhere and I was using them lots. The reason I'm mentioning it is because, you know, for anyone who's not familiar, shadow, this creature can block or be blocked only by creatures with shadow. So it can only be blocked by creatures with shadow. Again, and there's lots of different shadow creatures that were in Tempest block. They're basically unblockable, okay? Because no one is playing shadow creatures in Commander. And they can only be blocked by shadow creatures. So if you're looking for a creature, and a lot of people will look for unblockable creatures to put in certain decks because they want to be connecting all the time, maybe in their Tymna deck or their Ludwig deck or something like that. Shadow creatures essentially are unblockable because your opponent's not going to have any, guaranteed, right? So if you're looking for an alternative unblockable creature, shadow creatures are great. I put this one on here in particularly whenever it deals damage to a player, destroy target enchantment that player controls. That's great. Again, this can just sit on the table and just destroy enchantments every turn, similar to a Trigon Predator. They have all the Dothy creatures are in black, and those also can have some really good abilities. The blue ones are the Thalicos, I believe. Those were the 3 colors that had the shadow creatures. So for me, Solitary Visionary is pretty good. I've had it in a couple decks, but I'm just throwing it out there. If you're looking for alternative unblockable creatures, shadow creatures work great. Next up, Song of Serenity. And I swear I am not doing this on purpose. This is another Exodus card. 2 mana enchantment. Creatures that are enchanted can't attack or block. Again, this is just such a very unique ability. It's a hate card. I don't think there's an actual specific deck that this goes into. It's just a really great hate card. There's no other card in the game that I think does this. Global enchantment. Any creature that is enchanted can't attack or block. So obviously this is going to completely hose a Uriel the Miststalker. You know, there's a commander that I don't see much anymore, but if your play group has one, man, this just completely hoses that guy. Hoses a lot of Voltron decks. Boros commanders, there's all kinds of Boros commanders that are all about auras and equipment. This can hose a lot of decks. So this is very specific. It is for certain, if you're someone in your play group who has a Voltron or maybe a deck that just has lots of auras, this can really hose them. So it's worth consideration for that reason. Next up, Songs of the Damned. 1 mana instant. Add 1 black for each creature card in your graveyard. That's it. This is just a really, really great ritual effect. I don't know if I've ever seen this in a Commander game before. Just a fantastic ritual effect. That's it. Obviously just fantastic in any sort of a graveyard milling deck where you're going to have lots of creatures in your graveyard. And lastly today, Soul Barrier. This is a funny one. So 3 mana enchantment. Lots of enchantments in this list today too. Whenever an opponent casts a creature spell, Soul Barrier deals 2 damage to that player unless they pay 2. So I put this in the list. It's not fantastic, but you could literally put this in any blue deck and it would be good. That's sort of why I mentioned it, right? Whenever any opponent, so this doesn't hurt you at all, only hurts opponents, right? And any card that only hurts opponents and doesn't hurt you is going to be worth consideration. Anytime they cast a creature spell, it deals 2 damage to that player unless they pay 2. Nobody's going to pay the 2 for this, right? People almost never pay the 2 for Smothering Tithe. They're definitely not going to pay the 2 for this. I seriously doubt people are going to pay the 2 mana to avoid the damage. So this is just going to sit there and damage your opponents for 2 every time they cast a creature spell. You know, it's not super fantastic. If you are in a play group or a situation where you have someone who casts lots of creatures, I know I used to play against a guy all the time that had a Karametra deck and he's just casting creatures. This would have been great against him. In general, though, again, I talk about how if you're playing a mono blue deck, what I like about that is, I can try out cards like this. Cards like Soul Barrier, I can throw in my mono blue deck just because there's room. I got room. I only have 1 color to choose from. So that opens me up to fit in cards like this in my deck. And I just think Soul Barrier can literally go in any blue deck because it's only upside. There is no downside to it, right? So that is it for today. That is 10 more cards you should be putting in your Commander decks Like I said, I will be getting lists up. It's gonna happen. It's in the works. It's in the process. Be patient. I'm working on. I'm sort of new to all this, so I'm figuring it out as I go. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.